their logo, I know, says a political party for white Americans.
So it's white nationalism, basically.
So I guess it's white nationalists. Yeah. I don't really have any information as to whether or not this ties in with the CMP or some of that other information. I don't know if that's what maybe the person was implying, why they asked us with this. I know that it seems to me that it's one of those groups that is ultimately tied in, as you said, with white supremacism, white nationalism, which, of course, there are a lot of CMP tied to that type of stuff. With stuff like what we talked about in Volume 1 of The Secret Right, where we get into the stuff with how the eugenics, the National Center for Ethnology and Eugenics in Edinburgh, Scotland, and a lot of these guys were working with trying to prove that blacks were genetically inferior to whites. You had CMP members that actually openly admitted to doing that, so wouldn't surprise me. But I don't have any. I don't really know much about the group, but. Most of these white nationalist groups are being funded by the same globalist organizations that started things like neo-Nazism and the rest of it, which was, of course, was one of the banking cartel's ideologies that they funded Hitler and the Nazis to go forward with. So it sounds to me like it's another one of those groups that's going to be brought to the forefront in the coming Civil War scenarios that these CMP types are going to be playing out, Lee.
Well, sure. And of course, you take a look at the origins of the John Birch Society and what they were involved in. A lot of the people who first started the John Birch Society and were supporters, they supported people like George Wallace, and they had all sorts of connections to neo-Nazis and white supremacists and all these groups that were along that same type of mindset. Of course, you had people like Willis Carto, the American Free Press, and really you have this whole set of people that are tied in with these racist ideologies or ultra-white nationalist ideologies or anti-Jewish ideologies. And the reason why they have a lot of this information associated with that is because conveniently the corporate media can easily discredit legitimate information about the world order system by just saying, oh, well, no, these people who talk about this stuff, they hate Jews or they are racist. And they throw out all these labels as a means to put out this information to the mind of the average person that, oh, well, anybody who talks about this must be evil, must be bad. So it's just a way for them to easily discredit this information to the mind-numb masses that are out there. And I think that's part of what you have here with this particular group. Although I don't know a whole lot about it, so I don't want to jump to conclusions without researching some more. But Josh, you have more you want to comment on?
Well, yeah, I want to comment on what you were just saying there, because the stuff that you were talking about, these different groups, it reminded me. You get so much of this information pertaining to the CMP sometimes that you can remember stuff. You can't remember certain things that you'd learned about. But it just reminded me, because you mentioned Howard Phillips earlier as well. And you mentioned some of these different white supremacist groups being tied in with CMP types. Well, at Estes Park, Colorado in 1990, you had Larry Pratt and Howard Phillips up there. And Howard Phillips was passing out a manual. He and Howard Phillips had come up with it. That was the manual for the modern day militia movement. And in his book, written at that time, he had talked about how we needed Contra-style militias in the United States. And here is Larry Pratt with Howard Phillips, a Jew, in front of all these white supremacist Jew-hating people, basically telling them and training them on how to start the entire militia movement in the United States, a modern-day version of the Contras here in the United States of America. So, again, with those kind of ties, it does make any of these groups definitely up for question in their affiliations as well.
Okay, well, yeah, it's very interesting information, unquestionably, and I hope that answers the listener's question. That's just one group that I have to look into more myself personally. But anyway, we've got our question here. It seems like the emails keep coming in. So here's the email. It says here, hi guys, listening and waiting to hear who is Josh and what his full name and website are, films, so I can research you. Well, Josh, you want to answer his question?
Sure. My name is Josh Reeves. My website is theglobalreality.com. It's www.theglobalreality.com. You can also email me at globalrealityshow@gmail.com. All of my documentary films are up there at the website as well. We are taking my radio show. Now my radio show just started whenever I want it to. It's kind of been an open format, but coming up next Monday, January the 3rd, we're going to be taking my radio show back to the 11 to 2 Central Standard Time slot. up against Alex Jones. I want to thank Lee for helping me get a computer going over here so we could get that going, so we can have phone calls and guests and stuff again. And I that's kind of my New Year's resolution. It's kind of thing that I talked to Lee about wanting to do, and we're going to take the show back into that time slot and give people the ability to talk about stuff like what we're talking about right now, Lee, in that daytime time slot when you know who is on. So there you go. Like, again, you can email me if you have questions for me or things you want to ask me off air or things you'd like to ask me and want me to talk about while I'm on the show. globalrealityshow@gmail.com. That's globalrealityshow@gmail.com. So you can email me there, and I hope that helps, sir. Thank you.
Yeah, he said a few other things. I'll just read the rest of his email. He says he's very alert to the controlled opposition, disinfo, and damage control of Alex Jones, numerous others. No longer listens to Jones after 13 years, thoroughly disgusted. Very suspicious of all the alternative radio hosts, and as well he should be, or he or she, as well as their guests. Very revealing was not said, all roads lead to Rome. What were your thoughts on his statement, all roads lead to Rome?
I can't really argue with that. When you see the history of it, you really have to go and study the history of these different groups, and they do all inadvertently always lead to Rome, and inadvertently from the absorption of all world's religions. You at a time you did have a division in world religions, and you did actually have different groups of people around the world that believe different things. But we haven't had any generation since about, I don't know, 1776 or so that has experienced that, because all of these world religions were taken and absorbed by the Vatican and then turned into these modern day versions of these religions that have been used for control and divide and conquer and to justify wars and genocide and the rest of it. But the more that you dig into the Jesuit connections, the more that you find all the other things that you've found. Maybe you've already come to your conclusions about the things you know about Zionism and Jewish influence and all that stuff that's very much there. But it's certainly, just like I talked about earlier with David Icke, it's saying that the Jewish influence or the Zionist influence is the tip top is the same as saying the Rothschilds are the tip top. And there's actually more to it than that. What we want to do is to be able to create an environment of learning where people can understand all of these things and how they all interconnect together. And that's kind of the biggest problem that we haven't we've had with the whole, as you mentioned earlier, with the Alex Jones thing, is there just hasn't been an ability to be able to get all these things out there. So that would be my statement on the thing that all roads lead to Rome. But why don't you, for those people out there listening, why don't you go find out for yourself if all roads lead to Rome? Don't listen to me or this guy who wrote the email or anybody else. Go out there and look and go out there and dig and see for yourself if that's where you find that it leads to, Yeah,
well, certainly the Roman power structure has been around for a very long time, and they set up a lot of these religious institutions that continue to this day. It's pretty incredible. So I think definitely Rome, the Vatican, and that's definitely something that you have to research, and all these affiliated groups. And if you don't research them, I think you're definitely, it's just
selling
a big
yourself
subject.
Short. Yeah.
I was looking for the words, but exactly right, Josh. You're selling yourself short because, again, here's an institution that's been around for what, like 1,500, 1,600 years? That's a long, long time, and they haven't lasted that long without pulling some strings and having a great deal of power, and that goes without saying. So, but anyway, you got to look into it for yourself. That's all there is to it. I'm sorry, I'm kind of looking at these other questions that have come in. Here's another question. Okay, here's another one that I'm kind of not 100% familiar with, but I think I've heard this character before, but I'll throw it at you, Josh.
Okay.
Dear Lee, have any of you guys heard of the European New Right and or the Imperium Europa movement of Norman Lowell? Now, if I remember correctly, this guy is one of these Holocaust deniers and is kind of along the same type of vein as what you see here from some of these white nationalist neo-Nazis here in the States, kind of the same type of deal. But I'm not 100% sure. I might be wrong on that. But Josh, have you ever heard of Norman Lowell?
Yeah, I have, and I've heard of the European New Right. It's the same thing. It's no different than the crap we see here. It's the same. Their whole ideology is that globalism is bad, and globalism is the enemy, and we've got to go back to these old ways of the world and everything else. it's really no different than what we see here as with that last question we had about the white nationalist group. These are like European white nationalists, essentially. So, you know, I mean, it's the same thing I would have said earlier about the white nationalist group. I would say about this group, Lee. It's another one of these groups that probably was started with an agenda and to get people behind that ideology. So later that ideology could be crushed. So same thing. It's really no different.
Yeah, it seems like what I find very interesting about this is that it seems like in each part of the world, you have these different groups that have been set up with, I mean, they have their own local flavor, but really they're the same type of group that is set up in each of these localities to fulfill the same agenda. Like, for instance, the John Birch Society. I didn't know this until recently, but in Canada, they had a very similar organization called the Edmund Burke Society, which is really the John Birch Society only for Canada. So they have different brands of these same groups, and they fulfill the same agendas, and that's all there is to it. Okay, let's continue on with questions. Man, there's been a lot of them, Josh. This is a good idea. I'm glad you brought this up.
Yeah, I'm totally down with this tonight. I think it's good.
A ton of these. Let's see here. Okay, next question. Okay, we kind of touched upon a lot of this earlier in the show, but that's okay. What is your opinion on the Council for National Policy and their members, the right-wing evangelicals, portraying the end times? Well, we didn't touch upon that, the end time scenario. Do you think that they are trying to establish a type of mindset in which they want us to have for the coming New World Order, with the Christians believing it is the end times? And I firmly believe that's certainly part of the agenda. They absolutely want to make people, specifically a lot of these people who follow the Christian dogmas, to believe it's the end time so they can be more easily controlled. But Josh, what's your take on that question?
Yeah, I think that that's part of the engaging in the coming Civil War scenario. I think it plays right in with that. Really reinforcing to people more and more every day that we are now in the end times, and they've been trying to reinforce that for decades, not just recently. But I think that not only will the apocalypse be televised, it'll be scripted, and it'll be and they are engineering the apocalypse and making it happen. I think that's part of the plan. Again, getting us to react, and how many people are going to react to things like deities appearing for every world religion, telling us that all world religions have been translated wrong, and then they all come together and form one deity and say this is the one God. Now everyone follows that. Or how many people are gonna go along or be against when they come out and tell us hostile aliens are here to kill us and eat our brains and we have to arm against them. I mean, in any of these scenarios, you're going to get wide swaths of people that are going to, commit hara-kiri or commit suicide or whatever have you. I mean, I just Lee, see any of these ideas of how they're pushing this, and certainly with people like the Reverend Tim LaHaye in the Council for National Policy, pushing these ideas, writing books about it, talking openly about trying to rebuild Babylon. They haven't fulfilled the prophecy yet because they have to rebuild Babylon and then destroy it. Babylon was never destroyed. So whether or not destroying Iraq is the fulfilling of destroying Babylon, very well could be, or whether or not they're building Dubai only to wipe it out and tear it down later symbolically, I don't know. But it does, in all of their actions, appear that they are trying to, think about it. The whole book of Revelations, when was that added? A couple of hundred years ago? Up until a couple of hundred years ago, it wasn't even ever there. It was added in much later. So, there's definitely, you definitely saw the rise, and, the book of Revelations really came in after the rise of Rome and the rise of the Vatican and their solidifying of all world religions after about the late 1700s. So I definitely think that is a big part of the CMP's agenda, and that's a part of the fear-mongering, why they're telling us that the end is near and why we need to lock and load. And, of course, they were doing the same thing in the year 2000. Jones was doing that. His buddy Chuck Missler, who's another Sovereign Military Order Malta member, was doing the same thing, saying that aliens were going to invade us and Y2K and all this stuff.
Yeah, that guy's crazy.
There's a lot of money in fear, and I think that, again, all this stuff, they want us to manifest it. And manifesting our reality is very real, and I think they're trying to get us to manifest negativity in the end times and the 2012 crap. I mean, all of it. I think that ultimately, as I talked about earlier, we have to will this upon ourselves. There's something about them imposing it on us that goes against some sort of spiritual moral code. And I think that's why they're justifying this